My name is Kate Green. I am the Chief Strategy Officer for Urban Sites, and I'm moderating the panel today on due diligence and strategic partnerships. And so we have a really great panel up here that's prepared to talk to you about what I think is arguably one of the most important steps of development to avoid risk and to position your project for success. And also how, sort of educate the room and talk about how to build a strategic team that can achieve some of those due diligence items with you. And so I have today right next to me Kevin Herthel. He is the Vice President of Commercial Real Estate Finance with Park National. Next to him is Jilson Daniels. Jilson is the Senior Vice President of Economic Equity. And then finally we have Amanda Pinnock. She is a partner at Bricker Graydon and the chair of the Real Estate Industry Group. I'm going to pass the mic to each of them to just give you a brief introduction to themselves and how they've gotten where they are today. And then we also want to kind of understand the dynamics of the room and hear a little bit about you before we get started so that we can really cater this session to the needs of the room.
So as she said, my name's Amanda. So I started in commercial real estate about 15 years ago during the Great Recession. So I know the economic environment for real estate investing looks a little complicated right now. It was very complicated back then. So it's interesting to see some of the cyclical trends in real estate, to see, how deals get put together. And I think that can be an important part about building your team, is to make sure that your team has seen a few things, that they've been a part of a number of deals, that they can help you navigate some of these waters that may feel a little uncharted right now, but are kind of part of a bigger picture of real estate. So I'm really excited to get to meet you guys today and to talk through a little bit about what my experience is and how attorneys can be helpful in your real estate transactions.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jilson Daniels. I'm the Senior Vice President of Economic Equity at the Board. And it's funny to me to see the number of people in this room, because as Kate said, this is truly one of the most important topics in real estate development. It requires a lot of work, a lot of thoughtfulness, and this is not the part where you actually have a chance to say no and walk away, right? Or make the right decision and move forward. So I look forward to the conversation that we're going to have today. I'm a business coach as well. I do a lot of work with minority businesses and developers. I am the facilitator as well of Queen City Developers. I'm excited to announce, if I can do a selfish plug, that on October 11th, in partnership with the City of Cincinnati's Department of Economic Inclusion, we are launching Queen City Pitch, and that's going to be an opportunity for emerging developers and emerging businesses as well to come to the stage and pitch their business and get feedback from the business community and experienced developers and real estate professionals. So I'm happy to be here and hopefully provide some insight on this important topic.
Hi, my name is Kevin Herthel. I'm with Park National Bank. I oversee our commercial real estate finance group and commercial construction development. I've been in that side of the business for most of my life. My bio says I've had a part in over $1 million in development. That's more about my age than the actual dollar amount. But I've been involved in everything from single family flips. I flipped a number of homes myself to $40 million developments. 47 million being the largest development I've been a part of. So I've kind of run through the gamut of it. And without due, as Jilson said, due diligence is the absolute most important part. It's where you find mistakes, where you make your money, and where you can save yourself money. I thank the sponsors today. Sounds like it's been a great event. Great to meet all of you, and looking forward to interacting with you.
Thank you. So we'd like to understand the room a little bit more before we get started. And so by show of hands, can we understand who is a current developer or aspiring developer? Okay, majority of the room. Do we have any real estate brokers or agents in the room? Okay, and then I know we have some consultants. I see any lenders, attorneys. Great. I know we have one program officer from the city of Cincinnati. Anything I missed? Okay, and is it safe to assume that we are talking mostly residential today, or is there anyone doing industry or industrial? Okay, okay, great. Single family versus multifamily? Multifamily? Both? Okay, perfect. Anything else we need to know about the group before we dig in? Okay. Well, we want to get started just by kind of setting up the framework and talking about the various aspects of due diligence. And so I think I'm going to kick it over to Amanda to start to just share, what are some of the due diligence items that are standard, and what would you recommend thinking about before you put an offer in?
Absolutely. So standard part of any deal, you want to understand the title. So you'll get a title commitment. And what that is it's a search of all of the land records to find any easements or restrictive covenants or issues with title passing from a prior owner forward. That is an important piece of the puzzle, especially for commercial properties, because it can also provide an insight into, limitations about how that property can be used or developed. It can help you get ahead of any restrictions. It also may identify some environmental things that would be of record for the property. So that title search is a really important piece of the puzzle. With that, you also want to get a survey of the property. And there's a whole variety of surveys that you can purchase. A lot of times for commercial projects, you're going to look for an Alta survey. And what that does is it marries some of the information that shows up in that title search and shows you where those easements are located on the property. Especially if there's any plan to do development on the building, if you want to expand the footprint of the building, if you want to change things with the building, it's important to know upfront what you can do with that property, and that Alta survey is going to be a really helpful piece of the puzzle. Other versions of surveys are, mortgage location surveys. Those have less detail on them, and depending on what you're doing with the project, that can be sufficient. But at a minimum, you do want to get a survey so that you can identify any encroachments from another property onto this property. It just helps you make sure that you've got clean title and a good ability to use that property in the way that you want to. Another report that folks will generally get is an environmental report. There's a phase 1 report that exists where an engineering consultant will come in and take a look at the historic use of the property. They'll look at evidence of potential contamination. In addition to just the value of the report itself, there are environmental laws called CERCLA that if you have that report, it can give you some protection against buying a property and then ultimately having to be responsible for cleaning it up. So that's a really important report to get at the very early stages of your due diligence. This is usually something that will show up after you've made an offer and in that contingency period of the project. Another report that's important, especially for significantly for existing buildings, is to get a property condition report. That report, it can tell you, the age of certain systems. It can tell you if there are non-compliance issues with the building. Those elements are really important to understand to figure out if you're getting the value of the building that you think that you're getting. If the major systems are about to be at the end of their useful life, it means you're going to have to make a pretty big investment on the front end to get the building to operate the way you think it's going to. Those are really sort of the baseline documents. There's a zoning report that you would also typically get to make sure that you're able to use it, especially if you're anticipating a conversion of the property. Let's say it was, formerly a single family, or it was a differently used property, a commercial property that you think you want to turn into something. That zoning report is going to give you an idea of what that property can be used for, and if you have to go get some additional approvals in order to tell it the way that you want to. If it's a property that has existing occupancy, you'll want to understand what the lease obligations are. You'll want to understand what the rental history has been, and whether there's an anticipated turnover in the rental proportions, whether there may be some turnover. All of those things go also not just to the physical aspects of the project, but it goes into the valuation that you're going to ultimately be doing with the project. If you're seeking financing, and I think the rest of our panel may go into that, getting that information up front as early as possible is going to be really helpful for you to secure your financing on the project.
Thank you. One of the things you brought up was your title. And so before we got here today, we actually did a prep session on Wednesday with this panel. And we were talking about the importance of that title search and the importance of title insurance. And Kevin shared a very interesting story where he purchased a building and got the wrong title. And so I'm going to have him share that story, and we're going to sprinkle in case studies throughout to just make some of these concepts really real for everybody. I also want to just announce and share that we really want this to be interactive. And so although I have a full list, 2 pages actually, of questions, I'd really love for some interaction from the participants. And if you have any questions or reactions to things that are set up here, just please raise your hand and we'll get you the mic. And so with that, I'm going to have Kevin just share a case study of why this is so important.
Yeah, so frame of reference was 2009, so it was right after the crash and ensuing the recession. So myself and a partner bought a condo in Eden Park through the Hamilton County Sheriff's sale. And again, frame of reference, the courthouse was insane during that period of time. And you go to a sheriff's sale, there might be 100 people there, where today it's mostly done online. But if there are people there might be 3 or 4. 2009, it was a madhouse. So we had scouted this condo, thought of, settle on our number that we were willing to pay for it. Go to sheriff's sale, we have the winning bid. My partner goes to get into the condo to actually inspect it, because we couldn't do that prior to sale, right? All of a sudden, there's somebody living in it who can't get in it. And he's thought, well, okay, do we have a squatter here? What's going on? Come to find out that we didn't buy the condo we thought we bought. Yeah, so the short story, had it not been for having an owner's title policy, we would have been out, the $90,000 we paid for the condo. Instead, we walked away with, I want to say, $12,000, $15,000 for our trouble and time, just so the title company could just make it go away. So that's just a really quick story about the importance of owner's title insurance. You might want to explain the difference between the owner's policy and the lender's policy.
Yeah, that's right. So your bank is always going to require a lender's policy, but really that only protects the bank. It makes sure that their interest is superior to anybody else that might have a claim to the property. As an owner, though, you need your own policy. And if you get them issued at the same time, there's just a nominal adjustment in the fee. It's a really worthwhile policy. So similarly, I think we've all had a couple hazardous tales on things that have happened with title insurance. We've had a client a number of years ago that bought a residential property and thought that the road that led to the house that had been there for a while, that they had total rights to use that road. Well, they find out later that that road was constructed on a neighbor's property. Well, that seems like an easy enough thing, get an easement or adverse possession claim. All of those things cost money. And whenever you're asking for rights over someone else's property, they have a reasonable basis to ask for money. So because the property owner had purchased title insurance, the title insurance company was responsible for helping them resolve that issue. The number of times that access has become an issue in title insurance, there have been probably 20 cases in my 15 years of practice where it got really sticky. So really understanding the access to the property is critical on a due diligence component, but that owner's title insurance policy is a really important tool so that you're not the only one sort of responsible for resolving that issue.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about that? Yes, sir.
Not necessarily about that, but I do have a question regarding title insurance. So I refinanced my office, right? And so part of that was right around
think you can start with your title insurance company. I mean, they need to do some reasonable amount of diligence to make sure that the bill that they received matches the bill of the property. I wouldn't give up on it yet. Start raising a claim with your title insurance policy and see if they can help run interference. Ultimately, that check will need to be paid, but it's a worthwhile thing just to reach out to your title insurance company. There's a lot of ancillary documents and things that get signed as part of a closing, so you may need to look at that because it can have some disclaimers that the title company is receiving the bills and they're doing it based on the good faith estimates, but that if there's a dispute, it's between a buyer and a seller about how that gets reconciled. So you'll just have to look a little bit at the documents, but I would go ahead and reach out to your title company and see what possible recourse you have. Sure. Yes.
Or, just so everybody can understand how much it may cost to get these due diligence reports and the time frame for that, can you share that?
Title insurance policy, usually an exam, especially for like a single residence property or multifamily, usually the exam is about $500 to $1,000. The cost for the title insurance policy it's set statutorily, so it won't matter in Ohio what title company you use, and it's a portion of the purchase price of the appraised value of the property. And right now it's slipping off the top of my head what exactly that number is. Anybody having got? Yeah. Yep, that sounds right. Yep, that sounds right. So, go ahead.
What did you say?
Oh, $3 per thousand. Yep.
Then I want you to go through all of them. So
Sorry.
right now for
Perfect.
commercial and then also for the, what else did you say? Survey, phase one.
Yep. Again, a lot of those are going to depend on the complexity of the property and what's happening. I would say, for typical phase one, that's the environmental report. You'll see it $1,000 to $2,000, maybe less. Yeah.
1,200,
Yep.
1,400 to as much as 2,500.
Just depends on the complexity of the property, because what they're doing is looking at the physical space, they're looking at the records, they're looking at if there's any funny leads that make them feel like you need to do a little additional diligence, but that's usually roughly the estimated cost. And then for an ULTA survey, again, it also depends on the complexity of the property. Usually I would earmark about $1,500 to $3,000. Some of them, the price can shift if you have a really short timetable and they're able to accommodate. They may charge a little bit extra in order to get that turnaround time. Title insurance is statutorily set. The other ones are going to depend on the vendors that you work with.
Jilson, I wanted to ask you, all of this requires building a good team. I mean, you need to choose the title company that you're going to work with. You need to choose an architect. You need to work with a lawyer. You need to select your lender. You may need to hire an environmental consultant. How would you, both in your experience at the port, but also as a coach, how would you advise people to select the right players for a successful real estate development team and really pursue the right people for that job?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the best way I can start to answer that is be curious, right? Reach out to organizations, professionals, real estate professionals, real estate attorneys, realtors, and ask them who the best people are to help you get it done. And a lot of times the person that you're asking might be the right person. But that's part of due diligence. As you're going out and networking and attending events like this, people who will learn about what you're doing and they will offer the assistance that you're looking for. You'll be surprised how easy it is, but you won't know what to do and who to connect with, and to come up with that list. Like I think at a panel this morning, there was a gentleman that asked one of the panelists, where do I get that checklist to figure out exactly what I need to do? Well, that's a playbook, and often that playbook isn't available for every type of project, right? And some of it, there's a lot of art associated with real estate development. There's a science to it as well. And the more people that you meet, that you tell what you're doing, and first you gotta have them like you too, otherwise they won't help you. That's why I'm launching the Queen City Pitch. And that's the type of due diligence and the strategic thinking that's going to help you get a project launched and completed successfully.
A lot of times to your network, reaching out to who has had a good experience from somebody else. I mean, the beautiful thing about Cincinnati is that it's a small community, and that there's a lot of the same players that show up over and over in deals. And not that you have to go with sort of institutional talent by any means, but you know, you'll have run into people. A lot of times I'll refer, if we've got a conflict, I'll remember somebody that was a good lawyer that was on the other side of the deal. Somebody that was level-headed, business-minded, practical. Like, you need somebody that has worked in deals before, because there's one thing to come out of law school and practice law like they taught you in the ivory tower. It's another thing to have actually dealt with deals, figure out how to pivot when the deal needs you to pivot. So you really need somebody that's a business mind, especially from an attorney's perspective. You need a business-minded attorney that's done a few things, that has learned a few deals, has seen a couple things go bad, so that they know how to help you navigate. So I agree entirely. It's an art as much as anything, and it's just finding those folks that'll advocate. It's also finding somebody that is going to spend the time to understand what your goals are. I remember when I started my career, there's a lot of concern about what like LegalZoom was going to do to the legal industry and what AI is going to do. And yes, it's going to turn some of those, if it's a deal that could get done with a vanilla document that had no personality to it, or it got it far enough along, yeah, those probably work. But if you need somebody that can help tailor it, or can help you understand what your end game is, and help you figure out whether it makes total sense to do this type of report, or if you can maybe do this one. That's where having the expertise of somebody that's done it a few more times and has sort of learned on other deals is going to be invaluable to you.
And Kate, if I can just, and I'll give an example of what Kate, what we were just mentioning. You know, at the port, we get lots of calls about the properties that we have in the Hamilton County Land Bank. And there's a parcel that most of you might be familiar with in Bond Hill. It's called Midpoint Crossing. And we receive phone calls about that. It's 25 acres. And you wouldn't believe the number of calls we'll get. And the most recent one that I'll share is a gentleman wanted to create a motorcycle repair club on those 25 acres. And so he called me and he said that's what he wanted to do. And I said, I don't think that's gonna work. And I was trying to be nice, but certainly if during part of his due diligence, he had conversations with real estate professionals, real estate attorneys, people in the city, people in the county, they would have explained to him all the different reasons why that's not a good site for a motorcycle repair facility. Right, for one, it's 25 acres. Right, so why do you need that much land to repair motorcycles? And so it's those types of things. And you know, another example would be even in a residential neighborhood, and let's say you wanted to build something that is more suited for an industrial neighborhood, right? So again, having the conversations and part of the due diligence and building the team of people who will advise you what the right type of project is, that goes a long way, so you don't end up, one, making a bad decision, and two, spending time focused on something that's not going to work, and even in worst cases, spending money on a project and in an area where you're just not going to be successful, and so you're wasting that money.
Thanks.
I'm sorry. Everything that was stated is spot on. What I'll add to that is, and I heard it in the comments, it's about relationships. As you're building a team, even if it's your first time, as you're building a team, think about the relationship you can have with that person. You know, do you see eye to eye? Do you think about things the same way? Because those are relationships. You know, you can build a team now, and 5 years from now, working with the same person, it becomes seamless. It's like working. It sounds corny, but with family. You know, I have the privilege of working with some of the largest and most experienced developers in the area, and there's problems with every deal. there's complexities and things that, you know, can just halt a deal. But because of the relationships of using the same attorneys, using the same environmental group, using the same appraiser, using the same geotechnical engineers, those problems aren't problems. It's like, okay, everybody puts their head down, let's figure it out and keep this thing moving. So the relationship of when you're forming these partnerships, when you're forming, you know, the team you're going to work with, think about it from a relationship standpoint.
Great, thank you. I think something too that sometimes gets overlooked as it's not necessarily a technical due diligence item that we think about a lot as developers is the community engagement, and you know, is there an appetite in the market that we're looking at for affordable housing or a large multifamily building or an industrial site? And so those things matter too, because you know, does it necessarily kill the opportunity? No, but it does cost time and money if you are going against something that a community is asking for. And so that's another consideration that I don't think gets a lot of airtime, but it's certainly a big part of the industry. Kevin, I'm going to give it back to you and ask, you know, to put your lender hat on and walk us through, if somebody is going to put debt on their project, what are the due diligence items that you're looking for? What are some of the red flags that you might see? What sort of passes, you know, in terms of, okay, we can lend to this project?
Yeah, so it depends on the type of project, obviously. You know, the larger, more complex, obviously, the more things that we're going to look at as a lender. If we start with, say, a single-family flip or anything for family and under, or a scattered site, single-family kind of acquisition and redevelopment, and first and foremost, we want to know that the borrower, the developer, has a plan, a well-thought-out plan. They have experience, and if they don't have experience, they have a well-thought-out plan. But even if they have experience, we want to know exactly what the plan is. What are they going to do to these houses? How are they going to completely reconfigure them? Are they going to put lipstick on them? What are they going to do? We want to make sure we understand that. We want to vet the budget. You know, is the budget in line with what the market tells us it is? You know, are they going to go through and take out walls and open something up? Get rid of the plastery drywall, replace mechanicals, replace the roof, a laundry list, right? And then the construction budget does not support that. Those are kind of the things we look at. And within that, we want to see, know what they're doing to the house and does it fit the neighborhood. As a lender, we don't want to have a mortgage on the most expensive house in the neighborhood, right? So we want to make sure that what they're doing fits the neighborhood. They're not trying to create something that's worth $500,000 in a $300,000 neighborhood. Then the things that we've already discussed. For a single family, we want to make sure that they have, a structural inspection, depending on the age of the house. Is it a block foundation compared to a poured? Have there been evidence of water problems? We want to make sure they've done some sort of structural due diligence, mechanical due diligence. If there's concern of any plumbing or electrical, if you have old knob and tube, right? Those are things that we want to see they've looked at and that they're accounting for in their budget. From a general commercial standpoint, again, everything we've already discussed, from if geotechnical is required because it's just a dirt site, environmental, again, budgeting. I'll give you an example. One of the things is banks in general, but all lenders, have struggled with over the past couple of years is the 3% interest rates that came out of the pandemic. All of us were underwriting projects, at 3% and then accounting for a 2% rate increase when the loan rolls over. Silly us, we had no idea that we were going to be looking at, a year ago, rates being 8%, having loans rolling over that we underwrote at 5% when the rate was 3%, and now we're looking at 8%, and the project doesn't work anymore. Granted, historic times, but really don't squeeze. I guess what I'm trying to say is, in plain language, don't squeeze your budget to try to impress your lender. Don't squeeze your budget to make the numbers look absolutely optimal. Be realistic. Account for Murphy. I mean, Murphy's going to rear his head. Something's going to go wrong, and you're probably not going to hit what you think you're going to hit. And dig in and do more due diligence on that. Make sure that, you know, if it's going to be a full rent project, make sure your rents are right. And don't plan on getting 5% of the market because of demand. Because that demand can go away tomorrow. I know that sounds crazy in the environment we're in, but it can go away tomorrow. Something geopolitical happens and you think you can get 1400 or something, and all of a sudden now you're getting 12. So just account for those things. And how does the deal work? If I have to just really stress this, how does the deal work?
I'm going to pause there just to make sure that there aren't any questions from the group. Yes, sir.
So does it matter in a lender's perspective, for instance, if you're doing, let's say, contiguous three-unit duplex side by side, right? But you negotiate with the construction group that you're going to be working with, knowing that this is just going to be probably a demonstration of the development team, right? And so that construction group agrees that they're going to partner with you for the long haul, right? So they may give you a guaranteed max contract that doesn't necessarily speak to what the market said it should cost, right? Do you guys look at that from an underwriting perspective as it relates to potentially still participating in that deal?
The short answer is yes. However, the caveat is, with commercial loan, you're going to personally guarantee it, right? You're going to get the loan in your LLC's name, right? You're going to have a separate LLC with your partner, okay, your construction partner that we just talked about. You're going to have the personal financial wherewithal that in the event that contractor doesn't perform, or they hit their max and all of a sudden think, you know, bad things can happen, they think, we're not putting any more into this, it's on you. We want to make sure that you have the personal wherewithal to complete that project. So will we consider it and looking at the budget and think, okay, this is beneficial to the project, but we're a bank, right? So we need to make sure we can get bailed out. So that's how we're going to look at it and how we're going to address it. Yeah, it's something to understand. I don't want to get on a soapbox here about banks. I work for a bank, but I've also worked on the other side. You have to understand the difference between banks, investor partners, and private lenders and hard money lenders. You know, banks, everybody thinks banks make a lot of money. Banks work on a very, very, very thin margin. They are accountable to the regulators, they're accountable to Wall Street analysts, they're accountable to their shareholders, and accountable to the depositors, because the money you're borrowing is coming from their depositors, that they have to make sure that money's there if the depositor wants it back. They don't, bank does not get to participate in the upside of your project in any way, shape, or form. The only upside is they get paid back. So you have to keep that in mind when you hear things from a bank, you know, and think, well, why are they looking at it like that? Why aren't they looking at it like this? Why don't they see it the way I see it? That's why banks sometimes appear to be harsh in the way they underwrite, aren't as liberal in the way they underwrite, don't see the project the way you see it, because they have to stress it and put those extra underwriting layers on it to make sure they're going to get paid back.
I think there was another question in the back
Yeah,
first.
my question is, where are you getting your estimates from for the houses for your
So when we're vetting a budget, is that the question?
Yeah, no, where are you getting the value of the house from? When you're doing your evaluation of how much to run for each particular project, where are you getting it from?
Yes, so I'm going to speak probably a little out of turn here because it's not what I do with the bank I work with. But historically, and I think most banks are probably going to be pretty close to this, you know, they're going to do an as-is value and what you guys might call ARV, you know, as completed value. And it's going to be some formulation of a percentage of loan to cost, what you paid for the property and what your construction costs are going to be, hard and soft costs to complete the project. And then generally not more than a certain percentage of retail value, of market value. So it's really a percentage. I mean, typically you're looking at no more than 75 to 80% of cost and generally they want the loan to value to expand well beyond that. Obviously, we're going to make sure that there's margin in the deal, not just for you, but margin there to pay the bank back.
And tied into that, once in the area of the house, you say 300,000. Is building a house 375 too high? What is the sort of range that you must do 50s now?
I honestly don't have the answer to that because it's not the area I really work in. I would say in general, though, I mean that's a big spread, and that creates a lot of risk, right? You have if somebody can, granted, different market dynamics, and it really depends on the area, right? But as a developer, for a lender to have a mortgage out there on something that they know is well above market value, it creates risk. It creates, do you have to sell it at 375 to make money? Because if you have to drop the price to get more competitive to the local market, and you got to drop to 350, how much margin is left, right? As far as a hard fast, what percentage over market value, I don't have that answer.
Thanks. Jilson, I know the port is also looked at as a resource by many in this room and throughout our region. Can you speak to what some of those resources are, but also what the port is looking for in good partnership and what your expectations would be in bringing in a partner to take advantage of some of those resources?
Yeah, sure. First, I think I'll answer the latter part of your question first. When you come in and let's say you have a plan, and which includes you've done your due diligence and you are articulating that you can complete the project, you have the experience, and you have a competent team, then we're going to help you the best we can to complete your project. Because what a lot of people don't realize, the port, the properties that we have in our inventory, we don't want them to get back in the inventory. So if we sell it to you, if we put a lot of subsidy into the property to remediate problems or to stabilize a property, and we sell it to you, we want to make sure that when you rehab that project or you develop that project, it's going to stay in its best and highest use. And it's not going to come back into the land bank, and thus we have to use other public funds to, again, stabilize it or sell it again. So the stronger your value proposition is when you come to the table, you're going to get our attention, and we're going to work as hard as we can to help make that project happen, either through the public finance tools that we have, whether it's a capital lease, a sales tax exemption, or whatever. And a lot of people, going back to Kate's first question, a lot of people think we're a larger organization than we are. No, we are growing, but we only have right now about 35 people on our staff. We do provide ad hoc technical assistance to a handful of developers who we think have a lot of upside potential, but we don't have a whole team of people that can hold your hand through a development project. Brian Ogawa was up here. He's one of our main pre-development guys. He's our director of pre-development work on the commercial side. He does a lot of work with people to get them ready. We designed a pretty comprehensive application if you want to buy a property from the land bank that really walks through all of the things you have to think about. We're talking about due diligence here. That application process that we have covers a lot of the due diligence questions that you guys might have asked and that every panelist has touched on in one way or the other. We do that intentionally to try to make the process of buying properties from the port and from the land bank a little bit easier. But even with what we do there, it's not easy, because you go back to the art and science of it. We ask the basics to make sure that you can demonstrate competency when you're putting together an application and wanting to buy those properties. And so to that extent, we make available some folks on our team to help you kind of navigate and get that project completed or at least acquired, so we can move that property out of the land bank inventory. And I think other resources that we have, especially for, we think it's important to build a strong pipeline of minority developers. And that's why we launched the Queen City Developers in 2022. And I would be remiss not to acknowledge the work even of the Cincinnati office of the Urban Land Institute. It's a terrific organization. They have the Real Estate Accelerator Lab, which just launched its 6th cohort. I myself went through the 3rd cohort a couple of years ago, and I thought it was fantastic. And it will walk you through, on a very high level, the ABCs of real estate and economic development. And you'll be in the room not only with emerging and aspiring developers, but they do a great job of assigning you to real estate people who will be your mentors and coaches that will really help you understand all of the aspects to be a successful developer, from the smallest project all the way up to the largest project. And one thing that I love about the Real Estate Accelerator Lab is now they're actually putting the cohorts through a live, well, not a live, but they have to actually pick a project or pick a property from the Hamilton County Land Bank and do a plan throughout the course of how to redevelop it. And they pitch it to the mentors in the room on the last day when they graduate, and then they actually select a winner, and every person on the team in that winning group wins a cash prize. So for those of you who haven't heard of the REAL program by the Urban Land Institute, the Cincinnati chapter, I encourage you to reach out to them. They have a table out in the vendor section. Kim Fantasi, she does a great job for us. I'm on the advisory board of the Urban Land Institute here as well. And one of the founders of the REAL program is sitting all the way in the back, and she, Robbie Suggs, and she's also the president of Warsaw Federal, which is a black-owned bank here in Cincinnati. I've talked a lot, so did I answer everything?
I think so. And I completely echo your sentiments about the REAL program. I'm a graduate as well from REAL 2.0. There's at least 10 of my colleagues here today from that program, and it's been really fun to catch up with everyone. But it propelled me forward in the real estate world. And I serve as a mentor in the program today. I've mentored every year since I took it, and it was a really rewarding experience. I want to go back to the contingency period. So Amanda, when you were talking about the contingency period, it reminded me, okay, let's say that you have identified a market that you like, you've identified a parcel or property that you're interested in, you've done some basic economic feasibility on it, and it pencils. You want to put an offer in. Okay, can you talk about the term of that contingency period, and then what are some of the things that you would want to consider including in that offer to really protect yourself from risk?
Yeah, great question. One of the early conversations you want to have is about financing, because sometimes the financing that you want to get will help direct the timelines for everything. So reach out to our friend at Peoples or whoever else you're seeking your lending through. But make sure you have an understanding of where you're going to try to get your funding from, so you can get that commitment letter up front. Once you've gotten your letter of intent put together where you're ready to make an offer, even as early as that, if you've got the right partners, like I will sometimes look over letters of intent for clients. It's not necessary because they're not binding, but sometimes it sets the tone for the deal and like what things you can ask for when you get to a purchase agreement negotiation. So just having an understanding that if you set the letter of intent up right, it puts you on good footing to be able to ask for the timelines that you need as you're negotiating the contract. In the purchase contract, the diligence periods, when you're buying it for your home, you're going to see timelines that, like for your personal home, you'll see timelines that you've got to get inspections done in 10 or 20 days. That is not going to be what you want to strive for with your investment property. A lot of times I'm seeing, 60 days is a pretty short timeline to make sure that to get to closing, to get all of your inspections and reports lined up. It used to be too that you get title exams in 10 business days. It's now looking more like 15 business days. So by the time you get some of these reports back, you still have to look at them and evaluate them. So I would really encourage a diligence period, even for an uncomplicated project, of about 45 to 60 days. And depending on how hot the property is, you can negotiate with the seller. If it's one where you got to get under contract, you can try to shorten it and ask for extension rates with additional earnest money and things like that. But you really need that amount, a decent amount of time to get your arms around some of the reports and make sure your vendors are lined up. Sometimes if you're really invested in having examined the property in advance, you can get your consultants lined up ahead of time so that they're ready to go once you've pulled the trigger. We are still seeing that there are folks that will pull the trigger and spend the money before the contract is locked up. That's just going to depend on your risk tolerance, because if you never get to a purchase agreement, you will have invested that money and not get to the spot where you can ultimately purchase it. So it runs the gamut, and a lot of times it's driven by how hot that property might be. But in a more traditional sense, I would love to see a 45 to plus diligence period, even for a really straightforward purchase.
So I'm just gonna give you another question.
Yeah.
Let's say that you're in the due diligence, you do decide to go forward with your phase one. The phase one comes back and there's a contamination concern or just an environmental issue. What are your options? And how does that impact your project from a time and money standpoint?
So that phase one report is, it's a non-invasive test. They're not doing like soil drillings. They're looking for things in the record or things that they can readily observe that indicate there may need to be some further diligence done. And out of that report, they can recommend that phase two. And that is a much more costly endeavor. It's usually that there are signs that there's a contamination. It doesn't mean that you're done. It just means you need to know more. Because let's say that the property, was formerly a dry cleaner location and that there's some chemicals underground. Well, depending on what you want to do with it, you may have to ultimately do remediation, or you may have to set up an agreement with the seller to obtain that remediation. That can really shift the cost of the project. That's why that phase one is really important to understand, because once you own the property, you then take on some responsibility for getting it cleaned up. That phase two report, that's a more costly endeavor. That's sitting, closer to $4,000 to $6,000 is what I'm seeing. Sometimes I don't know what you're running into. Depends. Yeah, higher too. Yeah. That is significantly, and that's just to understand what's going on with the property. If you're having to ultimately exhume something, like if there's a storage tank or there's something that's beneath the property, that's really going to impact the viability. If you get to the point where you've got a phase one and you don't have enough time to get that phase two done, that's a point at which you really need to ask for an extension to that contingency period. It's really important that if you get that initial signal, you continue to run that aground.
Any questions?
So many questions.
Oh boy. Okay. Let's go ahead and start here.
Did the seller provide their copy of the phase one? Do you suggest writing it back or getting your own?
No, you need to get your own. So that report won't, even under that federal law, if you, in order to rely on it, it needs to be written to you. Now, sometimes you can get permission to reach out to that same consultant and see what their sort of requirements would be to update and to issue it to you. But that's a really great question. It gives you a good understanding up front about what you might be walking into. I would never say no to receiving information. And in fact, in your contingency, in your contract, you're going to want to ask for whatever documents they have. You're going to want to ask for whatever notices they may have about the property, or if there's, threatened like condemnation or, road expansions that will impact that property. So get all the information from your seller that you can have, but you ultimately need your own. Great question.
I just trying to zoom out a little bit. The land bank has hundreds, maybe thousands of properties in there, ranging across all kinds of stuff. So not just the rural available land, and then there's Cincinnati area,
In the land bank, or
I mean, I would say like, if you could speak to that, yeah, but maybe someone knows like, just to kind of like, there's a speed that things are moving, there's a level that they're moving at that you look at that and you're like, oh, there's a ton out there. You really get some hard one.
that's right.
What's the reality of us, we all are trying to do that, finding, maybe someone compete, finding, get it?
Yeah, I say there's a great opportunity to develop property in the land bank. No doubt, there are properties in the Hamilton County Land Bank that are the most difficult and almost impossible to develop. Right? That's the reason why they're there. Somebody owned it at one time and they decided they couldn't do anything with it, so they either abandoned it or donated it to the land bank or didn't pay the taxes, whatever. But there's a reason why they're all there. But having said that, there are many successful developers in the city, I'd say most of them, that have acquired properties from the Hamilton County Land Bank and have done something wonderful with that property. But one thing that a lot of developers don't understand and people in the public don't understand is every piece of property that we have in the land bank isn't necessarily available to buy on an individual basis. We may enter into holding agreements, for example, with community development corporations, which might hold a bank of houses or land so that they can either sell them to someone in the community or redevelop those properties themselves. And also other experienced developers will purchase some of those properties for a future development that they have in mind, but they need like 3 or 4 properties to complete an entire development project. Some of them are buying from the private sector, and then there's a bucket of properties that they're buying from the land bank and perhaps holding until they can complete that. But we put limitations on when we sell those properties of how long they can hold them before we take them back if they're not developed. The best answer I can give you is yes, there's a lot of great opportunities. You just have to, again, it's part of due diligence. You have to be able to understand what those properties are, who might have them at the time, and then even if there is a property that's under contract, for example, it never hurts to ask us if you find out it's under contract, if you can put yourself sort of in a position to buy it on a contingency basis.
And who's your best partner to do that piece of due diligence? Because there's all kinds of due diligence, and if you're looking at a property as being viable or not for a small who's the best partner? Is it consulting? Is it a lawyer? Is it title?
All of the above. All of the above. An advisor, certainly a real estate agent, a real estate broker. All of those.
Let's go back.
Yes, thank you, panelists. And quick question. One of the things I hear often is this broad brush statement about commercial real estate development. You were doing a great job of mentioning cohorts, so that takes it to another level. Could you perhaps expound from each of your respective opinions the difference between just commercial real estate development and commercial economic development? Because again, this broad brush is one piece, but the reality is not.
I'll start, and I'll try to answer that the best way that I can. I think that they are very closely connected because a real estate development project can stimulate other economic development. We do that at the port, in the neighborhood or the community of Evanston, for example. It was disinvested for a long time. Did not have a market rate sale for I think over 20 years or something like that. And we went in and we looked at the Hamilton County Land Bank inventory and we saw a lot of vacant and blighted properties, and we decided to redevelop them ourselves, both market rate development and affordable or workforce development for residential properties. And we did that under the idea that if we go in and develop those properties, we'll stimulate interest from the private market. And that's exactly what has happened. Now we got a little bit of pushback from the Evanston community for doing that, because of course that's going to affect property tax rates and property valuations and things like that. But that formula works. And I'll give another example. On Law Street in Mount Auburn, we built 8 market rate townhomes on a lot, and I think on that street there had not been any market rate development in more than 25 years. We sold those properties within 30 days, all well above our asking price, and we used the proceeds, or we're going to use the proceeds from those sales to invest in an affordable development that mirrors the exact image of those market rate homes just down the street on Loth. So I think that's a great example where a real estate development initiative translates into an economic development initiative.
Actually, I'm doing property now, so I'm not mad at you. Also, speaking of that, it looks like an ETA, or typical ETA, with time with respect to property, on the acquisition point to.
Yeah, that's a great question. Typically, we'll give you, it just depends. In the purchase agreement, there will be a time frame for you to complete your due diligence and actually complete the project. It could range from anywhere like 6 months, 8 months, or a year. And we're starting to recognize, and especially with the economy, that it's taken a little bit longer for some of these projects to get completed. So we're reevaluating our policy for extending purchase contracts, but still we've got to have some sort of parameter, because the last thing we want is a property that's been in the Hamilton County Land Bank and for someone to buy it and then just not redevelop it. And there are people who have figured that out, right? They can buy it cheap and they sit on it and they sort of sit back with their head down, and we don't reach out to them, and then they've got a cheap piece of property that eventually they'll sell, make a lot of money on it, and of course, if we miss that, we miss it. We do have some callback provisions though. But to answer your question, again, sometimes it's a year, but it depends on the project itself, the complexity of the project. And it's negotiable too, right? Like we may have like certain stipulations about the maximum amount of time that we'll give you to complete a project. But if you come in and you've done your due diligence and you tell us, no, this is going to take 18 months, I guarantee you'll get an 18-month agreement to develop that property.
We're looking at properties on the land bank. You find one that you want to submit a proposal for. How long do you guys usually open up proposals? Is there a date on there that says proposals need to be in by this day? Just asking that.
Yeah, any property that is available on the Hamilton County Land Bank, you submit an application for it, and then that starts the process. Occasionally, we'll pick a specific property and we'll issue an RFP for development. It means we've decided that we have to develop it, but perhaps we'll put an RFP out there to see if someone else can develop it better than us. And then if we don't get a good proposal, we'll end up doing it. But those are, there's only a handful of properties where we'll actually take the lead in that situation. But otherwise, everything is game. And from the moment you put in that application, if it's available, the process starts.
I got a two-part question. One, what is the website to the land bank? And then the second one is, on commercial properties, do you clean it up? Like we were talking about getting the property inspected for use. When you sell the property, where is that property at as far as that?
That's a great question. I forgot the first question, sorry.
What is the website?
Oh, the website. Just go to cincinnatiport.org. The Hamilton County Land Bank has its own site, but the web address is really long. I think it says hamiltoncountylandbank.org, which I think that's it. But go to cincinnatiport.org, and then there's a link for the Hamilton County Land Bank site. The second question, I forgot already.
So
Do you guys clean the property?
Oh, so in some situations, we will clean the property up. We do that when we acquire it. But we do have disclaimers on any property that we sell that you need to do your own due diligence to find out if there's any additional cleanup or remediation work that needs to occur.
If I can add to that real quick, so the kind of guy who does due diligence work in the environmental arena, sometimes the phase 2 cost is shared between the purchaser and the property owner. In the event that the deal does not go through, that original property owner can retain that data. So if you see a phase 2 that's needed, go back to the deal structure and see if it's a cost that can be shared.
Yep, that's right. Very good. Yep. And we do consider those as well. Now, it's not like we've got a big bucket of cash to remediate properties. We have to get that money from either the city or the county or even, in some cases, some other source. But if you tell us more remediation needs to be done and you get advocacy from the city, and let's say they'll give it. There's a great example in the West End right now, and I can't really talk about it, I almost did. But you know, the developer went to the city and said, hey, I want that property, but there's a lot of money that has to be put into it. The port said they'd buy it for us and remediate it, but they need the funding. And so the city made it happen.
Thank you. I want to make sure that there's time for the next session to start to set up. And so I'm going to ask a final question, just ask for some final remarks and also just one final piece of advice from each of you regarding due diligence or strategic partnerships.
Oh, I'll start. You know, I'll just say what I've said all along this afternoon is be curious, ask questions, build that team, and still ask questions and listen, right? Because you definitely don't want to go down a rabbit hole and start spending money. A lot of people are critical of our commercial team and our residential team for when they come to us for properties for being so, I guess, detailed in the questions that we ask. But again, I told you this because we don't want that property to come back to us. And so the better story that you have, the more confident that you seem, the best plan is going to minimize that hurdle of the more questions or even the ultimate denial.
I think I'm going to piggyback on that relationship side of things. The real estate community in Cincinnati is really tight and friendly and collaborative. I know that this forum really lends itself to asking questions, but there's a lot of spaces to meet people and to ask those questions, and people just like talking about their experiences. So use that as an avenue to just kind of build your team organically by meeting people and figuring out who you connect with. I mean, I know ULI keeps getting championed, but that's for good reason. They have a lot of like breakfast meetings and things like that. As you're building your team, those types of forums bring in folks that touch real estate from a lot of different perspectives. So I think take advantage of those opportunities in order to figure out who your right partners are.
I don't get a kickback, but get a membership to ULI.
For sure. Not every deal is a good deal. I mean, a lot of times, you know, you find yourself chasing deals. As a guy that flips houses and invests in real estate, I find myself chasing deals. Not every deal is a good deal. And be honest with yourself about what you don't know. Don't think that you can look at a HVAC system in a house and know whether it needs to be replaced or not. Don't think you can look at a roof from the street to determine whether it needs to be replaced or not. Be honest with yourself about what you don't know and find those people that know what you don't know and form those relationships.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your participation and thank you for the great questions.